Brian is initially presented as a weak and vulnerable member of the group. He first appears in Act 1, Scene 3, where the stage directions inform us he is crying. Richard complains, "I've walked all the way from school with these two, with him crying." John Tate calls Brian a crying little piece of filth, and when Phil tells Richard to take Brian to the head, Richard complains, "I hate him." Later in the play, Kathy slaps Brian. Brian was the one chosen to go to the head teacher in tears, and the suggestion is that he was the most likely to be believed in his story about being a victim. And yet, despite his mistreatment at the hands of the group, Brian is clearly presented as a moral and rational character. His first line of dialogue in Act 1 is significant. "I think we should tell someone." This is certainly the morally right thing to do, but no one takes his advice. Brian also seems to have the strongest conscience of all of the children involved in the deception. In Act 2, Scene 3, he explains what he feels when speaking to the police. "I'm crying because I'm lying and I feel terrible inside." This is arguably the most astute statement made in the entire play, as Brian is able to clearly articulate the effects of the deceit. The name Brian comes from the Celtic word meaning noble. Thank you, Mrs. Swinburne, for pointing that out. And it's a name which suits this character. His intentions are indeed noble and good, but he's unable to stand up to the threats and control of the rest of the group. Phil resorts to threats of physical violence to make Brian go to the police station to identify the suspect who's been arrested, telling him, "You have to go in or we'll take you up the grill." Kelly uses structure to present the power dynamic at this moment. Brian is disagreeing with Phil, but Phil interrupts him before he can finish his sentence. "No, Phil. Yes, yes, shh, yes." The interruption shows how Phil dismisses Brian. Brian eventually agrees to go as a result of the threats of violence, but not before continually voicing his refusal. "I'm not going in, I'm not going to the police station, I can't go in there, I'm not going in there, I'm not going in, no, no Phil." 7 times Brian stands up to the pressure of the group before Phil's threats of violence eventually cause him to give in. This again is Brian's attempt at noble action, and it contrasts with the lack of response from most other characters who simply do as they're told when they're told. The audience later learns that Brian's on medication, off his head. By the time Adam is discovered at the end of Act 3, Brian's dialogue is nonsensical and repetitive. "A hedge, I found him, I found him, I found Adam living in a hedge, I found him," and "I love the ground, don't you like the ground?" It appears that Brian has experienced some sort of breakdown as a result of the guilt he's been struggling with, and this is alluded to by Mark. When Kathy says of Adam, "I think his head's hurt," Mark replies, "Who? Brian's or Adam's?" Brian then bends down to eat a handful of earth. In the play's final scene, Richard explains that Brian's on stronger and stronger medication. They caught him staring at a wall and drooling last week. It's either drooling or giggling, keeps talking about earth. I think they're going to section him. In a play which explores the effect of guilt, Brian is perhaps the most impacted by what has happened. With his name meaning noble, it's as if Brian is unable to come to terms with the lies he's told, symbolised by his breakdown at the end of the play. Danny. Danny's major concern about being involved in the murder of Adam is that it will affect his future plans. "I can't get mixed up in this, I'm going to be a dentist." Act 1, Scene 3. Time and time again, his dialogue reveals the anxiety that his future career will be ruined because of what's happened, and this presents Danny as selfish, but also as naive about the adult world of the play. When he says dentists don't get mixed up in things, it's as if Danny feels that professionals are incapable of committing murder, which of course is incorrect. In Act 2, when news breaks that the postman has been arrested, Danny's concern about being discovered to have made the story up results in his complaining, "How am I going to get references?" Again, his focus is on himself, not the fact that an innocent man is facing a prison sentence. Danny is presented as a weak character when Phil threatens to take Brian to the grill if he doesn't go to the police. Danny's response is he serious? Which suggests he knows what Phil is saying is morally wrong, but is not brave enough to challenge the leader, perhaps because he holds his future career plans as being of paramount importance. Danny does once stand up for what is right, arguing about the framing of the postman, that we can't let them think it's him, but then quickly comes back to his own selfish reasons. "I really can't be mixed up in something like that, it wouldn't be right." There is a similarity with Brian here, who also once stands up for what is right, before quietening down and going along with the plan. At the end of the play, Danny is on the path to his future career, doing work experience at a dentist's, but the irony is he hates it, can't stand the cavities. He says when they open their mouths, sometimes it feels like you're going to fall in. And this is a reference to the deep shaft Adam fell into, and it indicates how Danny, despite his desire to stay out of trouble to focus on his career, is clearly troubled by what has taken place. Again, this is similar to Brian's situation at the end of the play. Danny and Brian, then, are two characters with glimpses of goodness who nevertheless succumb to peer pressure and pay a price for doing so.